let me first introduce myself and Ennova. My name is Thomas Phillipsen. I'm an organizational psychologist, meaning I'm a trained psychologist from the University of Aarhus in Denmark, where I live. I've been working with these things, leadership development, organizational development, for many years now. The way I got into this line of work was, in fact, that I joined the armed forces in Denmark as an 18-year-old young man. And I joined in part because I wanted to know something about leadership. I wanted to know something about organizations and all that. And I can surely say that I did learn a lot of good things about organizations and about leadership by being in the armed forces, where I became a sergeant. I learned a lot of things about how to organize things and to exercise things and to write things down and to have lists and all that. And I could certainly see that helped. But of course, a lot of the problems that are outside the armed forces are inside the armed forces as well. So things like trust in the leaders I had, people's trust in me as their commander, those things were actively things that weren't easily, fixed by making different kinds of organizing things or putting things on people's shoulder to say that you are in charge and so forth. And that's why I left the armed forces and studied psychology to become an organizational psychologist. Now, what I do at Ennova is, in fact, I was brought into the company some years ago to help Ennova in a transformation to move from being a pure platform company into a platform company with a human touch. Now, this means, in fact, that we have a whole host of our sort of business that is the Ennova engagement platform that we have. But the human touch entails that we have built into the platform a lot of things about what has to happen after the survey and when you have survey results, in order to really make the survey results and the survey make a difference in the organization. And the way I work with this in my day-to-day work is, in fact, that I support organizations, leaders, executive management teams in how to get the most out of the engagement survey results that we provide them with. And that's, of course, also what I'd like to talk to you about today. How can you, in fact, unlock the potential that is clearly there? Because, as I've written here with this, and try to illustrate with this very beautiful picture here. Engagement data is, in fact, pure gold. You can really do amazing things with engagement data, but of course you need to treat it like gold. If you don't, then you won't get all the exciting things that you can get out of it. Now, yesterday, Helen showed something that looked a little bit like this, and I am glad to say I completely agree with the different ways engagement is actually crucial for business success. Now, we know all this from research, actually. The most easy thing to understand is probably that we can see from research that engaged employees tend to create and sustain customer satisfaction, more loyal customers, more satisfied customers, and of course that's good for business. At the same time, we have a lot of research within social psychology and organizational psychology pointing to the fact that if you are an engaged employee, you are very likely to do work of higher quality, you are more likely to be productive while you are at work, and you are less likely to be sick. There's simply a quite clear relation there between being engaged and not being very sick, especially that kind of sick leave that is on Mondays or on Fridays. And then, of course, we can see that there's a clear link to turnover as well. If you are engaged, if you like what you do, if it makes sense, then you're likely to stay, of course. And we've already spoken a lot about the costs of hiring people and training people into the organization. So this is really what's at stake. And I know I may be preaching to the choir today when I say this, but this is, of course, because this is the rationale that people in executive committees, they really understand. They do understand when we explain these things. But of course, if we just talk about, and it goes with many of the HR initiatives we take, if we just talk about it as something that is nice for people, they will not always listen. But this is a way to open and unlock that door. Now, as I said, there's a lot of potential, but there is also the risk that, well, this beautiful data that we have will just end in the trash can. It will not mean as much as you thought. And oftentimes, actually, people in HR are the ones that can really see that this matters. So the big task is to get the rest of the organization to understand why this is indeed important, so that you can actually take the optimal value out of these survey results. All right, so what I have for you today, two quite simple keys for you to unlock this potential. The first key is a powerful question that you can ask your executive leadership team about their situation and their relation to these survey data. And then the second thing is a guiding principle for the whole organization, meaning a principle you can use in this situation where you have any kind of data really, but you need people to work with the data in order to change the organization. And that is, of course, one of the primary goals, apart from, taking the temperature of the organization, then in fact trying to help people in the organization do small changes based on the survey results. That's what you really want in order to also legitimize and give credibility to people actually spending time working with the survey. Now, let's look at the first key there, the powerful question. So the first key is to help the executive leadership team reflect, and I did this on purpose. You don't need to help them typically take action because they are always already very well equipped to take action based on whatever data that you give them. So it's the reflection thing that really matters. That's where they need help. There are things that they are really good at. And you all know executive leadership teams. Some of you are even a part of executive leadership teams. You will know that typically these teams are very good at identifying problems. They're very good at making plans to try to deal with problems. And they are very good at communicating, or typically that's something that they really try to be good at communicating. So that's another box we can tick. And of course, they are always very good at taking decisive action, because actually that's oftentimes how you end up in an executive leadership team, is by proving through the years that you can indeed take action. And that's, of course, these are really important things. So I'm not saying this is a bad thing. It's just something that you need to keep in mind when you are talking to these people about something that needs them to slow down and that needs them, or where you need to help them to reflect. And I actually think in the work I do with executive leadership teams, helping them take time to reflect and really think about things is what matters the most. What I am going to show you now are the easy steps. There are easy steps, 3, and then there's the serious question, the hard question. The easy steps, of course, whenever you have this engagement data, remember that the context is that you have that you've asked everyone in the entire organization to spend time filling out a questionnaire, and in that situation, you really have people expecting that something will happen based on this. So, of course, an important thing is that they need to communicate to the organization. We really take this seriously. This data that we have gathered, your responses, the way you feel about our organization, we really take it seriously. So of course, that's a communication task they have. They need to say this in a way where people can hear that it was worth my time to do the survey and take part in this. Then, of course, they also have to decide on a few symbolic actions in order to show the organization that it wasn't just people talking when they said, okay, we take this seriously. So it's always a good idea to have a few things that many people in the organization can see, that now something is happening based on the feedback we gave in the survey. And then, of course, the third action part and the last easy thing here is to engage in discussions about engagement with their own leadership teams. Everyone in the executive committee always has a leadership team that they are responsible for. And the best way to show the organization that you are really taking this seriously is not to skip that one, not to say, well, we already know these things and we are so highly positioned in the organization that this is not necessary. This is very necessary. So that's the third easy thing. You can show them this and they will know what that means. And of course, now we can look at the hard thing. and the question there. The question that has the biggest impact by far that you can ask any executive leadership team based on survey data is this: in what way might we be contributing to this problem relating to engagement? So asking them, in what way are we really a part of this, or in what way might we be a part of it, is the most important thing in my mind. Of course, this can be several things. It can be, how might we be contributing to this from the perspective of what we communicate to the organization, the way we talk about decisions we make in this room when we go out in the organization. Are we really being true to the things we decided in the room? Are we good ambassadors for the whole team, for example? That might be an issue that might come up, and oftentimes does. And it might also be, and that's probably the hardest thing of all things, is might there be something that goes on in this room when we are together as a team that is reflecting problems in the organization, the way we work together, collaborate, or the way we sometimes fight about things? How is this maybe visible in the survey data for the whole organization? So these are questions. If you bring this in, if you can set the stage for a serious discussion about this, then you can indeed really get somewhere. And just to give you an example from real life, I worked with an executive team in an airline company, and they had received the feedback from the organization in the survey that there seemed to be poor cooperation between different parts of the organization. And as you probably know, airlines, a lot of things really relate to each other, and all the different functions, they are very well sort of connected. So if a problem is here with the mechanics, then it's going to be a problem for the pilots, for the people on the ground, for the people who set the timetables and all that. So it was really a serious business problem for them. What we did, of course, we did other things together. We had some leadership development team, leadership team development sessions. But a big part of this was actually to ask them, in what way might you be contributing to this problem? And what became clear along the way was actually that they were not feeling as part of one team. They were feeling like ambassadors of their particular part of the organization. So the head of flight operations, he was always shielding his part of the organization, and so were the others. The commercial director was just focusing very much on this specific part. And when that became clear to them, then they could start doing something else. So they changed their meetings, actually. With a clear example, a visible example, was that they actually incorporated, when they evaluated on each meeting, did we in fact serve the whole organization in this meeting, or did we just serve, parts of it? And that became a way. I know some other leadership teams where they in fact have an extra chair at the meeting table, and that chair is representing the organization sort of as an image there, that you can put it up and say, okay, if we just listen to this perspective, does it feel that its needs are served by what goes on right now in this room? All right. So that was the first key, asking the right kind of questions to executive leadership teams. Now, the second key, as I said, it's a guiding principle. So this is not a three-step solution in any way, but these are principles that you can use, especially when you work with engagement data. But of course, you can use this in a whole range of situations where you need to change something in the organization. What we can see from working with many organizations through the years, and many processes around these engagement surveys, we can see, and that's the most important thing, that the process itself is actually more important than what kind of activities you decide at some point along the way. So the way you do the follow-up, the way you talk about these things is more important than the specific actions that you choose. Now I'd like to show you a small video here. Now, I think that's something that you do when you speak like I do now. But actually, I don't have a corporate video to show like the beautiful ones we saw just before. I have a home video that I went to YouTube to find. And what we are going to see now is a little bit of everyday life. We get into an organization, not an organization, we get into a car somewhere in America where some parents have been up real early to surprise their children. I have now learned that it's called a Disneyland surprise. So they have printed out signs, "We are going to Disneyland," to prepare this surprise for their children. Now this is, of course, the best thing I imagine a child in America could actually wish for. It's a school day, so they don't have to go to school, they can go to Disneyland. So the intention is completely pure and perfect. But let's just have a look now what happens. It's 40 seconds and then we can talk about it afterwards.
Disneyland right now?
Look at the sign. Look how our bags are packed. You're not going to school.
You're not going to school today?
You're going to California.
No.
Yep,
Yes.
we already talked to Miss Lieber.
Yes.
Yep,
What?
Look at all the bags.
we're going to
Charlie,
Disneyland.
we're going to Disneyland.
We didn't even talk about this.
Are you excited?
We didn't even talk about this.
We're taking a vacation to Disneyland right now. We're going to go see Mickey Mouse and Minnie Mouse.
We're driving to California.
No.
And we're gonna guess
Right
where we're
now.
gonna stay in a hotel that's on the ocean.
No. We didn't even talk about this.
Well, that didn't go according to plan, I think. Well, no, I feel very sorry for the kid and of course also for the parents here, but I think there is a really important lesson in this. But let's just translate this into an organizational context. We can even say an HR context. Let's say you figured out the perfect system that you just need to present to the leaders in your organization, and they're going to love it because you took everything into account. And then you have someone sitting there with stone faces. They don't probably leave the meeting room. They don't say much, but you get the feeling that, okay, even though they don't complain about this, something seems to be off. Now, if you ever get into a situation like that again, then remember this child, and remember he said, we didn't even talk about it. And in that way he says it so clearly. We didn't talk about it, so I'm not ready to do this, even if it's the perfect surprise, even if it's what I always wanted, then this was just too much in a way. And of course, this is sort of, if we take it into organizations in a little bit a more serious note, then there has been done quite a lot of research in this. It was actually the two Canadians, Kim and Mobonye, who started this research quite a long time ago. Those are the people behind Blue Ocean Strategy, as many of you may know. But they did this research, and it's been a research field ever since. The organizational processes with a focus of fair process. It's oftentimes called fair process thinking because you really think about how can you design a process and conduct a process so it is perceived as a fair process from everyone in the organization. Now the idea here is that research tells us if a process is being perceived as fair, then the attitude of people in the organization is typically more trust in management and more trust in the decisions that are being made. And of course, this leads you to take part in this, in the process afterwards. You're willing to share your knowledge. You're willing to implement any decision that you make in this situation. So that's actually the way it works here. If we really think about the process, then the behavior will follow in many instances. Of course, the thing here is there are things we need to focus on, and we are pushing a little bit more of our leadership and organizational efforts into the beginning of these processes. Instead of dealing with a lot of resistance at the end, we are instead thinking about how can we design this process in a way where we will actually make these things possible. Okay, research says 3 things to remember. There has to be clear expectations, there has to be involvement, and there has to be transparent decision-making. This means, first of all, clear expectations, that whenever you involve people in anything like this, whenever you make a change, whenever you have a new set of data that you need to work on, then you really have to set clear expectations. So, explain why are we doing this now? How are we going to go about this? What's my plan for this discussion? What can we discuss? Are there things that are out of bounds that we cannot discuss? That's okay. because this is not a democratic situation. This is still a leadership situation. But you can certainly say, these are the things we can talk about. Now, remuneration, that's not a thing we can fix in our team, so that's not a thing we'll talk about in this specific instance. So after clear expectations comes involvement, and this really means asking questions you don't know the answers for. So you want to involve people not to make them feel that they were involved, but actually also to gain knowledge that you don't have. That's the second thing. And the transparent decision making means that whenever you've got all the input in and a decision is going to be made, then you explain why you made this decision and not another decision. What's your reasoning behind the decision? What's the intent that you have that made you say that we're going this direction? Even though I heard some of you say you would like us to do this, then I decide, I made the decision we're going that way because I focus on this and that. Okay, so with these three things, well, we actually are well covered. But the problem is, of course, that if just one of these things are not present, people will typically feel that this was unfair. Maybe they're surprised. Maybe they thought we could talk about things we couldn't talk about. Maybe they don't feel that their opinions really mattered. Maybe they don't understand the decisions that were made. And that increases distrust in management. And, of course, this leads to what used to be called resistance to change. People not really following you, even though you say that this is the way we are walking, and these are the reasons for this. So this is indeed the easy principle. Of course, it's also hard because this is in fact process leadership. So you have to think about this as also a way of training your leaders and your organization in working with process leadership. Just to give a little bit more insights as to how this fits into situations with these engagement surveys, it's important to really tell and explain why are we even doing the survey? Why is engagement important? Why is it important for us to work with these engagement data? And as I said, if something is not up for discussion, it's perfectly fine. You just have to say so from the beginning. Well, we can talk about all this, but this is not up for discussion. We can't decide this at this particular level in the organization. Involvement really implies that leaders should listen to employees' experiences on all the levels in the organization before sharing their own interpretations and ideas. Now, this is an easy thing to say, but it's sometimes a hard thing to do. Leaders need constant reminders that they are to work with this in this way. Because if it's not said, then typically, especially if results are somewhat low or a manager has been worried about this or feels that I don't like these results, then they are very likely to act and say, well, this is our plan, this is what we're going to do. And that's in fact the opposite of what is really needed, because if results are low, more conversations and more questions are needed than quick answers from the manager's perspective. And of course, this is a very important occasion to talk about leadership and the relation between leaders and people in their teams on all levels in the organization. So this is important that leaders specifically ask for this kind of qualitative feedback. So we see the numbers, but I need to hear from your perspective, what is it actually that I do that works well and what could be different? All right. And of course, whenever they make decisions based on this, they really need to share their reasoning and intent. This is why we are going to do like this and not something else. This is also a way of training people in the organization in how to think and make decisions like the leaders think and make decisions. So in that way, even though this takes time, then it is really a way of training the organization and doing important progress in that sense as well. All right, just to give you an idea of how this might work, because naturally this implies that the leaders have to do something in a different way. So sometimes we give the leaders small cue cards that they can use, maybe even in starting conversations with their organizations about this. So it might be something like this. Well, 4 principles: small changes lead to big changes. Concrete discussions beat abstract discussions. If you think about it, almost everything we talk about today and yesterday, and when we work in this domain, are abstractions. Leadership, engagement, Collaboration, all these things are abstractions. It's not actual sort of physical actions that we can see. So we really need to help each other talk about what do we really mean when we talk about collaboration as being positive and good things, and how might it be different. And of course, it's always important to talk about things that work, because that's a way to acknowledge that, and of course help us believe that we can indeed change the things we need to change that don't work so well. And that's of course the last thing. We also have to talk about the difficult things when we work with our data. Then we typically advise leaders as well to simply get these kinds of templates, things that they can use to facilitate such a discussion in their organization. And that's of course because some managers, they feel very well versed and secure in situations like this, but others, they really need something like that. So for questions that they can give to their team, maybe they even need to leave the room to have the team talk about leadership without the leader being present. That's probably a good thing. And then the leader can come back and follow up on this and help it turn into specific actions. Of course, the leader is responsible for whatever feedback that he or she gets or they get. But then, of course, when we look at things the team needs to be responsible for, having such a template or something like that is really useful. And again, we talked a lot about managers being overburdened. What we really focus on here is, in fact, that the manager is responsible for their own development, but the team needs to be responsible for the development activities that come out of such a survey and the discussions that they have based on that. And then, of course, very important last thing, to remember that this is not a one-off thing. If you do a survey every year or half a year or every quarter, you really need to do things and continue these conversations between the surveys. So helping managers to think about the occasions that they actually have, to talk about engagement in the period from now until whatever next survey touch point there will be. All right, so that was the last key, and with 3 minutes left, just to sum up here, it's a good idea to ask this question and to help the executive leadership team having a serious discussion on a well-reflected basis. And then again, to think about the process in the whole organization as fair processes, to think about how can we actually do this in a way that makes sense. So focus less on specific actions and more on how it actually comes about. And the reason for all this, and this is my last slide, is just to say that, well, in many ways, organizations are in fact patterns of conversation. And if you want to change the organization, it really happens when you change the nature of the conversations in the organizations. And that's why when we talk so much about the processes and the conversations, that's because if you can relate to each other in a different way, then your organization will really change. Yeah.